Neil Fachie is a visually impaired cyclist for Team GB. Having always wanted to be an athlete, Neil took up athletics at a young age. Years of competing led Neil to his dream in 2008 when he was invited to the Beijing 2008 Paralympics. After failing to impress in the Games, Neil was dropped from the team and his funding was cut. After some soul-searching, Neil took up track cycling, and what a good choice that turned out to be. In the 11 years he has been riding since, he's won 17 gold medals, including 4 Commonwealth medals and gold at London 2012. He's broken countless barriers in the sport and will surely be considered a legend. I had the honour of meeting the Scotsman to talk about his career, meeting the Queen, and preparing for an Olympics in lockdown. Thanks very much for joining us again, Neil. It's a pleasure to have you with me. Someone who's got as much weight around the neck as you, especially the amount of gold. But for anyone who doesn't know who you are, can you give us a little bit of a profile of yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a paracyclist. I'm someone with a visual impairment, so I ride on the back of a tandem with a fully sighted person on the front. This ensures I can compete without the fear of crashing a bike. Obviously, not being able to see very well means traveling at speed, you're far more likely to crash. So I ride on a tandem with a fully sighted person. We both pedal, they do the steering. So it's very much a team sport, two-man team. And I've been involved in cycling now since 2009, so over a decade. And during that time, I've won 14 world titles, 4 Commonwealth and 1 Paralympic title, so it's been very good to me over the past decade.
And obviously, I've read that your sporting journey started when you went to Aberdeen University, but where did it actually begin for you? Because it seems that you've wanted to be a sportsman for a long time.
Yeah, and I was one of those kids with too much energy, so I was very much shepherded into sport. I was very competitive when I was young, so everything was a sport to me. And I tried everything when I was younger, but it was athletics that I found about the age of 10 that kind of really first gave me that, motivation to kind of outlet that I needed, to that freedom of going as quick as you can. It was just simplistic, and it was a great way of burning off energy. It very much started then. I was very sporty, but I wasn't particularly successful when I was young at sport at all. It was just something I enjoyed. I enjoyed pushing myself and just the social aspect of it as well. So it was never really that I foresaw myself competing on an international stage as much as I might have dreamt it and things. So yeah, it's been a long journey from then, of losing many races and it just being a hobby to something that ended up being a career further down the line. And it was kind of later in my athletics career when I became aware of parasport, got into that around 2005 and ended up going to the Beijing Games in 2008. And that didn't go all that well, and I subsequently lost my funding, which is why the change in sport came about. It wasn't through choice, it was through I was let go and there was no hope, and London was 4 years away and that was my target, but I essentially got booted out and had to look elsewhere. And it was just by chance that I gave cycling a go, and it turned out that was probably the sport I should have been doing my whole life, really.
And you've mentioned going to Beijing. Was there ever a point when you were doing your athletics that you realised that actually you were going to be able to make it to that point, to go to the Olympics?
Probably as I got onto the GB squad around, I was going to get this headphone going as well, in kind of 2005, 2006. I went to the World Championships 2006. That was my first World Champs. And I had no idea really at that point what the sort of level was like in parasport. But I went to those World Champs and I finished 6th and 7th in my 2 events. And at that point, I realised that I was competitive on an international stage. Although I was still a long way off actually winning the medals, despite being that close positionally, it was still quite a chunk of time that I couldn't really see myself making up. That's when I kind of realised that it was maybe a reality after all, and something that I was then pursuing full time, and that's what I moved into after my degree.
But what was it like actually experiencing the Olympics itself? Because to actually be there, especially in Beijing, such a phenomenally and such a different city in itself, it must have been an amazing experience for you.
Yeah, and I didn't really know what to expect. So the great thing about the Paralympics is you see the Olympics 3 weeks beforehand. So I was sat at home watching Usain Bolt breaking world records on the track that I knew I'd be running on, and kind of seeing those full crowds. That Olympic experience was incredible, and I knew I'd be racing there, but I didn't really have that expectation that it would be as big as the Olympics. And it wasn't until I arrived that I realized just how massive the Paralympics actually were. So, I walked into the village in Beijing. As you say, it's a very different place, a very different culture. So it was all kind of overwhelming and new. And you walk in and look around, and it's this enclosed area just for the athletes village, athletes and staff. And I see all these apartment blocks with national flags draped from them, people from all across the globe, all with different disabilities, this hugely diverse place. And it was just massive. Like, the food hall was extreme, everything's extreme in this village. And then you realize how big the hype of it was as well. Traveled to the venues, and I was going to be racing in the Bird's Nest Stadium, which is 90,000 seater stadium. It's huge. Walked in there and looked around, and you just think, wow, this is massive. So it was very much overwhelming, but it was a great experience to fall in love with the Paralympics, to get a feel for how big it was. And the Beijing Games were probably a real move forward in the Paralympic movement. I mean, London was massive for Paralympic sport, particularly with Channel 4 taking over. But Beijing was a real big stepping stone for the Paralympics, and it was great to be part of that and see it and see these huge crowds and the excitement, and know that back home we were starting to get a following as well, which was incredible. So it was a mixed experience for me. I fell in love with the Paralympics. It was this huge thing, but my performances kind of were very average, and I finished 9th in both my events, just missed out in the final, top 8 making the final, both the 100 and 200 meters. So it was quite bittersweet in many ways.
It's like you mentioned yourself there, you didn't do particularly well, and then you lost that funding. And was it sort of, in that moment, was it sort of like, right, that's it? Or was it like, obviously you got into cycling eventually, so was it a case of, right, I'm going to look for something else?
I'd love to say it was just instant, but reality is I got that phone call saying, we don't think you have the potential to make it to London 2012. Your funding is cut with immediate effect. And it was this huge blow. I mean, at that point, I thought the dream was over. I had my eyes set on London 2012 just to compete at a home Paralympics. To me, would have been this huge thing that not many people get that chance. And it just seemed like it had been taken away from me at that point. So, it wasn't a case of simply bounce back and go. And instead, I kind of slipped into a bit of a depression. I had family kind of encouraging me to move on with my life. So I was applying for jobs, not getting anything. I started going down the job center, signing on, and it was a proper low point. And obviously all my friends who had been through university were now off in jobs, and quite starting to work their way up through the ladder in whatever industry they find themselves. But I was sat at home and not really anyone to contact. So it was very much a low point, and no one else really knew what I was going through at that point. So there was a couple of months of that really before I was able to reflect and kind of say, you know what, if you don't try, you're going to regret it. And I kind of thought through, well, I could go back to athletics, give it another go. But reality was I'd kind of reached my full potential there. I kind of knew that. So I thought, well, let's just give something else a try. I mean, I was at this low point where I had nothing to lose. So I went and had a look at every sport for visually impaired athletes that would be in London, and thought, I'm just going to work my way through them until I find one I might be good enough at that I could give it a crack. And top of my list was cycling, because I've been a lifelong fan of the sport, and I thought it might be something I'd be suited to, kind of with my body type. So I made the commitment at that point to not get in touch with British Cycling and say, look, I'm this athlete, can I come and have a try? But I thought, I need to know if I'm going to be any good before I do that. So I called up Manchester Velodrome and said, can I have a shot, basically? And he said, we've got these taster sessions that anyone can come along and give it a try. And I signed up for one, and I was living in Aberdeen at the time, so I had to travel by train like 7 hours to get to Manchester. So it was quite a big commitment just to do this taster session. And I didn't tell them I couldn't see very well because I thought they might not give me a try. I'm just on a standard bike, and I made sure I didn't ride too close to anyone. And yeah, sure enough, I got on there. I was terrified because it turns out the velodrome is terrifyingly steep, and I had no idea. You know, on TV it looks quite steep, but nothing like when you're there in person. But I survived the taster session, and by coincidence, there was a GB cycling session on just after that session, and there was someone warming up for it who spotted I had my Beijing rucksack from the games, and he recognized the bag and kind of beckoned me over, and we got chatting. And it turned out this guy was Craig McLean, who was an ex-Olympian. He won silver in Sydney in the team sprint. And he just transferred over to the Paralympic squad. He told me that he was what's known as a pilot, someone who rides on the front of a tandem, and he was desperately looking for a visually impaired athlete to ride on the back with him. And I happened to mention, well, I might know a guy who could be interested, and fast-tracked my progress onto the squad. And yeah, I mean, it was kind of meant to be, really.
But you also pointed, like, it was, you were in the squad, so you went down for the taster session, and then it was 7 months before you were actually confirmed to be in the team. Is that right?
Yeah, I can't remember the exact times. I guess, yeah, it would have been, I went down in October, and then it was April before things really kind of got kicked off. So it was this sort of spell where I was still a bit of a low. I was training in Aberdeen on my own, and Craig had sent me through a few training sessions, but at that point I didn't really know it was going to lead to much. So I was still signing on, still applying for jobs and everything like that. But there was that kind of real lull of just hoping that they might see something in me and give me a chance.
I was going to say, because those few months, sorry, but it's you being in Aberdeen and having to train to be on a tandem with your partner who's not with you. How does that work?
Yeah, so all I was really doing was, I had a road bike, which again Craig had provided for me. It was very helpful, and I got a turbo trainer, which essentially is a static stand that you can place a bike in, applies resistance to the rear wheel. So I was just training on that in the house on my own, with no idea what I was doing, because it was so alien to me. You know, just I knew how to go out and run and train on an athletics track, but not what to do on a bike. So I was almost transferring sessions over that I would normally do onto the bike and making do. But you know, it was getting me used to riding a bike. It was better than nothing. And the idea was that we had a few of these selection sessions that I went down to now and again, and I was just trying to find a way to improve so that I could impress them when I went down next time when we tested in Manchester. And sure enough, I made enough of a gain, and Craig fought my corner. And from there, I decided that I needed to be in Manchester really to give it a crack. As you say, I want to be training on the tandem. That's the only way I could really learn how to ride a tandem, is being on it. So I made the commitment to move on the 1st of June in 2009 with no real savings to my name. So it was a big commitment. I rented a flat with another guy from the squad and gave myself a few months essentially to try and make it. If I didn't, I'd have to go back home and try and find a job. But it was kind of an all or nothing. I felt like I had to go for it, and it played out pretty well in the end.
I was going to say, it's a switch that you possibly couldn't have chosen better yourself. It was in your first taste of a real event was actually in Manchester, wasn't it, with the World Cycling Championships? So how was that for you? Because you've been selected for the squad and you've got into it. What were your expectations going into that?
Yeah, it was a strange one. So that summer, I knew those championships were coming. The guy who had won Paralympic gold in Beijing on the back of the tandem, Anthony Caps, he had decided to ride at the World Championships on the tandem, which I saw as a phenomenal opportunity for myself. So I moved down there and trained as hard as possible, and adjusting to a new sport as a full-time athlete was tough going, and it was a hard summer, and you know, I was fatigued and exhausted the whole time. It was just really tough. But at the end, there was this light that possibly I could race in these World Championships that were in Manchester as well. And I had no idea globally how I'd stack up. But as we got closer and closer to the champs, and I got selected to ride with Barney Story, who had won at Beijing on the front of the tandem as well. So I knew I had a world-class pilot there. And I realized from the excitement he was showing from the times we were doing in training that right, we must be doing something pretty good here. We must be competitive. And then the week leading up to the championships themselves, we did some training efforts, and Barney said, that's really close to the world record. Actually, we're really going fast. And at that point, I kind of realized, like, wow, okay, this is the real deal. And almost there was an increase in nerves, because at first I was going into it with that expectation of, it's a championships, we'll see how it goes. But now there was this expectation that maybe we are contenders to win it. So it was pretty overwhelming again, going into championships, not really knowing much about bike racing at all. I'd competed in 1 or 2 events that year, small events, but nothing like this. And I had to be kind of guided through it really by those who were in the know of, this is how you warm up for a race. This is, what you should be doing in and around your event, and what times you should be doing different things, because it was so alien to me. It was very different to athletics. But it was almost a perfect event where I seemed to hit my form. I was still improving and hit my form at the right time. And sure enough, we delivered, and ended up coming away with 2 golds and 2 world records to boot, which was an astonishing turnaround in the space of just over a year, from losing my funding to suddenly being double world champion and on top of the world. It was mind-blowing, and obviously much quicker than I ever anticipated.
Yeah. And and obviously since then, over the next 9 years, you won 12 gold medals in the track world championships, 4 Commonwealth gold medals, and most importantly, I would imagine, I don't know, the gold medal in London 2012. What was that feeling to finally get to that point that you'd been dreaming of getting to, and to break the world record and get the gold medal in front of that crowd?
Yeah, I mean, as I said previously, my goal had just been to get to London and to be part of it, because I thought that would be so incredible. And I didn't anticipate how huge London 2012 would actually be as well for parasport, and how much the nation would embrace it. And it was just astonishing, even in the days leading up to the games, when we realized that, all the venues were sold out. There was so much hype around it. And I think everyone had that Olympic fever almost, that they wanted to carry on. And so the Paralympics were perfect for everyone. It was incredible. And then going into that event, I was probably considered second favorite to win, to be honest. Our teammates were probably considered favorites. So I guess I knew we were real contenders for a medal, but winning it perhaps seemed a stretch too far. But on that day with the full crowd, and it's a noise I've never heard. I mean, the Velodrome in London, some people may have seen, it's the Pringle shaped with the roof that kind of channels noise down onto the track. So you got a full crowd, and the noise just sort of hits you in the track center like an absolute wall. And it was just something so special. So when you walk up onto the track, they announce your name, and you just get hit by this huge roar. Support behind you. I mean, that could be something that could crack people, I appreciate, or it can be something that really spurs you on. But fortunately, I was able to embrace it. And when I was actually during the race, our event, the 1 kilometer time trial, is about 60 seconds. And the idea is you get the bike up to speed as fast as you can, and then you essentially hang on as lactic builds, and you gradually fade towards the end. And the amazing thing was having this crowd behind you, that as I was fading away at the end, you just hear this huge roar, and you just felt like, I've got to do it for this crowd, and you find that something extra.
What an experienced outfit. You can just tell that, looking at them working together in unison, so still together and holding a beautiful line as they go around the corner. The crowd absolutely behind them here at the Velodrome. This is very, very exciting for the home spectators. So Neil Fachie, Barney's story, 0.728 ahead as they go around the final turn. They're going to head down the final straight with over a second advantage.
We came round to cross the finish line, and I just kind of heard, as clear as day from the announcer, 3 words that were new world record. And it was just this instantaneous moment of relief. And then you heard the crowd erupt to that news, and just the huge joy. And some of my celebrations were somewhat dramatic, to say the least. You know, I was milking it for all it was worth, that's for sure.
But not just a Paralympic record, that is a new record, world record set here at the Velodrome at London 2012. What a performance by Neil Fachie and Barney Story in front of their home crowd. They absolutely love it. So Neil Fachie has broken his own world record here in the kilo event in front of his home crowd.
But yeah, just that sort of outlet of emotion from everything that had gone on from that 4-year cycle of losing my job, hitting rock bottom, and then coming back to that incredible high. It just kind of all released on that day, and it was such a, it's like that cork popping out. It was just such a great time to celebrate with that crowd, and you know, it's something I'll never forget.
And you mentioned it then, that the crowd and being in the middle, and I've watched that run, London 2012, a few times now, and it seems like that walk up from the centre where everybody's trading on the turbo traders, and you're walking up slowly to your bike, your tandem, and it's like your name gets announced, everyone realises it's the Great Britain team, and it must, in that moment, your legs not go? Do you not feel like you might collapse at some point because the nerves of having that all that sound?
Yeah, I mean, we'd come down to the velodrome the day before because we foresaw this could be an issue. So we made sure we came down because there was I think we were day 2 or 3 of the games. So there was some racing before us, and we thought we need to experience that beforehand. So one of our teammates was racing. We made sure we were down in track centre just to hear that noise, so that didn't freak us out. And when we went to hear it, it was just, you know, we turned to try and speak to one another as that roar happened, and you literally couldn't hear each other. It was just immense. But that prepped me so well to know that was coming at least. But yeah, you're right. I mean, you're walking up towards that bike knowing this is your one chance, one race. You know, it'd be so easy to do something that would just blow your chances, and you're very aware of that, and there's a lot of negativity going through your head as well as those positive thoughts. And I'd be lying if I said I went there confident I was going to perform, because reality, you're thinking, what happens if I muck it up? What if I do something stupid and blow it, you know? So it's all about just kind of having prepared in advance to know the processes of the race, to know mentally how to deal with those negative thoughts as well. And that's something I've worked on over the years, and find that way to cope, because yeah, I mean, that I probably will never be in as high a pressure situation as that again.
But I want to talk a little bit about the race itself and your position in that, because you being on a tandem, being visually impaired, it seems to me from when I was looking, it almost looks as if you're looking straight down. Now, having to race, literally not seeing anything, and having someone cycling in front of you, is that not nerve-wracking in itself, just knowing you're having to hope that your pilot is doing everything correct?
Yeah, and that's it's definitely why it's not for everyone, I have to say. Like, if you're certainly, there's a lot of cyclists who have got on the back of the tandem to give it a try, and often they hate it because they need that control themselves, and putting their life in someone else's hands doesn't really agree with most people. So in some ways it is terrifying, and you definitely have to have that trust in the pilots that you ride with. But for myself, having not really ridden the velodrome much myself, bar that taster session that first time, I guess I don't really have that experience, so I'm happier to trust someone else to do it. Saying that, I wouldn't get on the bike with just anyone, of course, you know, so it does take a lot of training with someone, building up that trust. But there have been times over the years as well, I've had a couple of crashes, and that knocks your confidence again, you know, so you are aware that it's a risky sport. There have been some horrific injuries, particularly on tandems, because there's so much weight on them that when they do come down, you know, it can be pretty nasty. So I am always aware that there's that risk involved, and it is quite scary traveling at sort of over 70k an hour, essentially with no control of where you're going, you know. But for me personally, that's kind of eclipsed by the joy of traveling, that freedom. Going back to what I was saying about when I started athletics at 10 years old, that freedom and simplicity of just going as fast as you can. And that's what I love. So that just trumps it every time.
You mentioned there that the trust that you need in your pilot, and I found Brian Story, Craig McLean, Pete Mitchell, and Mark Rotherham. And it's how much of an input do you have in who your pilot is, or do like your very beginning, do they come to you and ask you if you want to ride with them?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, it's British Cycling who make those decisions. So we have, well, they will select the stokers, that's us in the back of the bike. There's currently 2 on the program and a few on the development program as well. And then there's the pilots. And again, we've currently got, well, 3 currently on the go actually. And it's up to British Cycling then to decide who the pairings are, who rides with who. And, you know, sometimes you'll end up riding with someone who's a good friend, and occasionally you ride with someone who you don't necessarily get along with. So, you know, it's just business at the end of the day almost. And it's kind of similar, I guess, to like rowing pairs, things like that, where the nation will make those selections and you guys have to make the most of it. So it's interesting, and it takes a good few weeks to just get that basics going with someone, riding in synchronicity, getting that trust. And then it takes months and months to kind of really get the subtleties of riding together, knowing what the other person's doing and how they kind of race, how they react, and also how they cope with training and the sort of different things you can do in that regard. Because obviously we spend an awful lot of time together on the bike, in the gym, you know, various different trainings, and also working on that kind of mental side as well together. So when we do get to those big races, that we know the other one's not going to crack, and we can have that confidence in one another.
And then obviously so London 2012 at this point has been and gone. You've won the gold medals there, and you said that's probably about as high as you could ever felt, because it's like the cork popping on a bottle, as you described it yourself. But so once you've achieved that, what are your goals from there? Do you think, right, I'm going to have to try and defend this year in, year out, as you have done so well? Or was it a case of, do you feel so good? You hear these stories of people like, oh, I'm never going to feel that again, so you sort of lose your passion for it? Or was that how you maintained it?
There was a few things really, and after games you do get a bit of a low, because obviously that's an extreme high. You're surrounded by people and teammates for weeks beforehand. There's this huge hype, and then obviously when it goes well as well, you've got the huge emotional plus of a great games. And then you come back and you almost having to reset because there's nothing on the horizon short term. But I was quite lucky post London. I mean, obviously there was a lot going on with parades and award ceremonies and things like that. We were trying to make a big deal of it as a nation, which was good. So we kind of kept that going. But I did have Commonwealth Games in 2014 in Glasgow on the horizon. And tandem racing was being taken into the Commonwealth Games for the first time. So we're competing. There's a selection of para sports that are at a Commonwealth Games alongside able-bodied. So we're competing at the same competition as my able-bodied teammates. And this is the first time, that tandem racing was going to be in the games, and it'd be the first time I'd have the chance to race for Scotland, and it was going to be another home games. So, you know, that was a huge motivator to get back in, get training. And that really pushed me on through that first time. And working towards Glasgow was, you know, I felt like as a Paralympic champion at that point for GB, that, you know, I was a real contender for Commonwealth Games for Scotland, and that was always going to be an incredible experience as well.
I was going to say, actually, because you've taken the Commonwealth Games quite by storm from your appearances there, and it's do you feel, because obviously when you go to the Commonwealth Games, you are flying the flag for Scotland instead of Great Britain, and do you feel more of an affinity to the team of Scotland? Do you feel that those medals, and especially I'd imagine in Glasgow, winning it there would have been almost equal to London 2012 itself? But do you feel like it's, you know, it means more to you in those races?
I'm not sure about meaning more, but there is something quite special as a Scot. You've always got that link to Scotland. And I think all the home nations have that kind of pride of when you split off. And it's a really interesting situation at the games, because we train with our teammates centrally in Manchester, and then we come to these events where suddenly we're all competing against one another, and it's quite bizarre really, but it's also good fun. But yeah, racing for Scotland, it was the first time I'd done it, so it was something pretty special. I don't think it's anything more special than competing for GB, but it's just a bit different. You've got different teammates, different staff members, and something about the Commonwealth Games, there's a slightly less stress about it, whereas the games are the absolute pinnacle, the Paralympic Games. The Commonwealth Games are kind of almost that intermediary step sometimes that's seen by nations. So there's a bit more fun around them. which makes it a bit more enjoyable. In terms of the event itself, it was probably the sprint event in Glasgow where we came away with gold was probably a more enjoyable win, because I genuinely didn't think we were going to win it. We were very much second favourites to the Australians, who they out-qualified us, and then the final, which is a best of 3 rides, whoever crosses the finish line wins each ride. They took the first race, and very comfortably we were 1-0 down, and essentially, one more defeat, that was it, we were done. And I didn't really see how we could beat them, but we came up with a plan in ride 2, and the idea was essentially we wanted to be as close as we could, so we didn't look stupid. So we'd lose at home, but not look stupid, and not get absolutely destroyed, basically. But somehow, coming down the home straight, we managed to come alongside them, and we essentially nipped them by a tyre width or something on the finish line to level it up at 1-1. And that seemed to break them mentally, and we won the deciding race. So to turn it around from that losing position to win it, those are the kind of victories that are, they really stick in your mind, because you had to do something incredible to win it. So that was probably the most enjoyable victory in my career in that regard, that overturning that unlikely situation to come away with gold was just huge.
And also in that same year as Glasgow, you went to Mexico for the cycling championships, and it was there that you broke the minute mark in the kilo. And would that been an aim of yours, or was it an achievement that just sort of came across like, my God, I've broken a minute here? So it's never been done before.
Yeah, not long after I'd started in cycling, I started saying to myself, I'd love to be the first person to break the minute for the kilo, 10 seconds for the flying 200 meters. And it was one of those things, it was kind of this real long-term, if I could do that in my career, that would be incredible. So it was something in my mind. And then when I heard we were going to compete in Mexico at this place where you're at a level of altitude where it definitely has a performance benefit, where the air is a bit thinner, so therefore you travel through there quicker, then it was this real opportunity suddenly. Well before we were at that level to be breaking at sea level, suddenly there's this opportunity. And the thought that really crossed my mind was, I need to win there, because if I don't, someone else might be the one who breaks that record, and we might not get that chance again. So going there, yeah, that was very much the target, and to actually do it and break that 60 seconds was special. And then again, break the 10 seconds as well for flying 200 meters was immense. And I kind of thought those were times that would never get surpassed until someone went back to altitude. But the way sport progresses, we're now at a point where we've beaten both those records at sea level. And in reality, if we want to win at the Paralympics, which are now next year, we're probably going to have to break those records again. It's just, things keep progressing nonstop. So I never foresaw the sport would quite get to this stage, but it's nice to still be the one who's leading the way at this point.
And you mentioned it yourself, you've been in the sport now for 11 years, and you've been at that top level, constantly maintaining your world championships. You've kept the Commonwealth Games, and how is it you keep yourself mentally at that heightened level of performance?
I mean, it's a lot about setting yourself those sort of targets. So the likes of breaking those times, having those things on the horizon of these achievements you want to break. For me, the thing that's keeping me going at the moment is going back to 2016 in the Paralympics at Rio. I went into that as an immense favourite to win. So I'd gone undefeated for 4 years up until that. So the expectation was very much that we were the ones to beat. But on that day, the bike from the Netherlands pulled out an incredible performance, something that I thought we might still be capable of beating, but we just crucially weren't quite up to it on the day. And they took the gold and I came away with silver. And obviously a Paralympic silver medal is something I'm immensely proud of now. But at the point, that was just this complete and utter failure. So, this huge low point in my career suddenly, where I thought this could be the kind of beginning of the end of my career. You kind of hear people get into the 30s and performance starts to dwindle, and I thought maybe that's me now. And I've had my high point, but again, through a lot of soul searching and picking myself back up, I kind of found my way back to being number one in the world again. And so that's been my target ever since Rio, is that I'm going to aim to get that Paralympic title back. I feel like I should have won there, but for whatever reason, it didn't happen. So that's been keeping me going for 4 years. And obviously I was hoping to do that this year, and we've had to extend the target for a little longer, but that's fine. You know, I'm still up there, so it's okay for now.
That's a perfect lead on to the next question. It's if we flash back maybe a few weeks before all the what's happened that's happened now, how was preparation going for you for Tokyo?
Yeah, prep was incredible, really. I mean, we went out to the World Championships at the end of January, start of Feb this year, and in the kilo, which is the event we have at the Paralympics, we got our world title. Rode a pretty impressive time, 59.7. So again, breaking that 60-second barrier and getting close to the world record again. So things were exactly where we needed them to be, and we were back in training after that and setting some incredible times even in training. So I was very confident going into the games that we were the ones to beat. I'm also very aware that in a games year, as happened last time in 2016, there are those bikes who can make incredible performances. So I knew we needed to get quicker, but I was confident we could do it. But obviously there was the news of Corona breaking around the world, and we were aware of that around the time of the World Champs, but never quite foresaw that it was going to explode the way it has and have the results that it had. So we were still very much targeting Tokyo. But obviously we've had to massively re-strategize at this point, and the last thing I want to do is be in the best shape of my life this August, because there's no real outlet to make the most of it. So we have to completely change it around now.
And that's almost, you've almost answered the question there, because it's I've always imagined in my head that you have these very strict schedules that you have to keep by, and you've got these times that you want to be hitting leading up to an event, and you want to be hitting your peak just before you go to one of these, Paralympics or whatever. So now you've heard the news of that. Does your training suddenly now become softened, or do you have to, like you said, you've had to reschedule it all? It's how do you bring yourself back down almost?
Yeah, so I mean, training looks very different, I have to say. So the initial thought was that we kind of keep going, but then you sort of look at big picture and realize, well, we've got 16 months till I need to be at my absolute peak rather than 4 months. So training the way I was going to get me in that perfect shape for that point in August this year. And at that point we didn't quite know when the games were going to happen. There was still talk that they might go ahead or they might take place in spring next year or something. So there's that bit of uncertainty, but now we know where they are. We can kind of work backwards from there. So how do we get in the best shape possible for late August 2021? And kind of working our way back, the realization is that we've got an opportunity now to really kind of get some base fitness, something that I can do from home quite easily is kind of increase my fitness, still do gym work and stay strong. But I don't need that outright speed just now that I do when we come to race day. So rather than training getting easier, in some ways it's gotten harder because I'm doing endurance-based stuff, which is not something I'm naturally very good at. And I'm putting in more hours, probably less intensity than I normally do. But yeah, it's quite challenging, but it's also good fun to have a slightly different looking training block than I normally would during challenging times of lockdown to kind of keep me entertained mentally as well. So it's been in some ways a good fun experience, really, just to completely switch things on its head. But yeah, I mean, the show still goes on. I'm still a full-time athlete and still training twice a day, generally most days of the week.
How does your partnership with, whoever your pilot is for the next Paralympics, how does that continue? Because unless there are some 2 meter long tandem bikes that I don't know about, then it's, it'll be a lot of FaceTime calls, a lot of messages, hitting your targets and stuff. Is it hard being away from the person you're going to be competing with?
Yeah, and obviously, as you say, tandem riding is a no-go. It's just something we can't do. Social distancing dictates that there's no way. So that's kind of had to been shelved, and that might be a challenge when we do finally come out of lockdown, that we may find it a little tricky for a few weeks to kind of find that synchronicity again. But in the meantime, we train as individuals, we keep in contact, see what the other one's doing, and discuss kind of training through online calls using platforms such as Zoom when they work correctly. So, you know, it's quite a new experience for everyone, I think, globally, is how you work remotely, but something we've never really had to do either. So having these kind of coaching meetings remotely, but similar to what we would do at the velodrome, we can still look at training programs, we can still analyze performances. So we've got metrics we get from my training sessions on the bike. I can see my power outputs. I can look at the gym lifts I'm doing and analyze what weights I'm lifting and how many reps and things like that. So there's plenty we can look at, and we can track progression throughout. And just socially, that importance of keeping in touch and seeing how everyone else is doing. Although being a typical bloke, I'm not always the best at getting in touch, to be honest. So I'm kind of aware that time passes by and we've had a week of training and I've not actually spoken to my pilot, and you need to check base and make sure he's still doing fine. But yeah, so far I'm enjoying it. I think he's doing okay. So I'm confident we'll come out of it in a good place, but it's obviously a unique situation, but it's the same for everyone, of course.
And taking it back to a bit more of a positive note, in 2013 you were awarded with an MBE, and you were, what was that like? Was that a surprise to you? Did you see that coming at all?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you're aware that often this is something that happens, but I kind of figured that so many people in London were successful. I mean, it was a huge games for both Olympic and Paralympic squads, so many medalists. I thought it's unlikely that everyone's going to get awarded an MBE for winning a gold medal. But yeah, that letter came through and it was a bit of a shock, but obviously a very nice shock. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously not something I ever imagined I'd have the privilege of doing. And reality is that it was probably more nerve-wracking doing that than it was walking up to the start line in London. You train for a race, you expect what's going to happen, whereas going down to actually receive your MBE, and we were very lucky. It was actually the Queen who gave me mine, and she doesn't do many of the investitures now, so that was a real privilege. But yeah, just hugely nerve-wracking to standing there waiting your turn to go up and stand in front of the Queen and be, you've got to answer questions and all these kind of thoughts of, what if I trip up, or what if I mess it up, or do something that you're not supposed to do. And it was an amazing experience, but it was probably more nerve-wracking, as I say, than any race I've ever done.
And finally, what are your goals now? Because obviously Tokyo has been put on hold until next year, and then obviously we've got Birmingham 2022, where you can become the most gold medaled Scotsman in Paralympic history. And is it Olympic history as well?
Yeah, for both able-bodied and parasport. If I was to win 2 golds in Birmingham, I believe, unless someone else does even better, then I believe I would top the table. So, I mean, we're still waiting for confirmation of the events that will be in Birmingham. So there's a chance that I might not have events there, but if they are there, particularly with the Paralympics now being 2021, that would only be another year away. So the lure of going for that would be huge. And of course, there's no guarantee I'm going to go there and win 2 golds by any means. So it's a huge challenge, but I mean, that's an immense prize to get. It's something I'd love to do. So yeah, if there are events there, I'm sure I'll be racing in Birmingham. Beyond that, I'm not sure, but these events keep popping up. And in 2023, there's cycling world champs are all combining all the different disciplines in Glasgow, of all places. So that's pretty tempting as well. And then if I do go to there, then you're talking potentially 1 more year till the Paris Paralympics. So, I'm not saying when retirement's coming. I'm getting on a bit. I'm not going to lie. And there are plenty of people who want my place, but while I'm enjoying it and improving, then I'm going to keep going at the end of the day.
Well, it's been a pleasure to speak to you, Neil, and thanks so much for helping me out. It seems that the fact that you've managed to continue as long as you have would probably suggest to me that you're going to continue to get that success as long as we don't have any more delays. But no, thank you very much.
No, thank you, and thanks for doing some good research. Far more than most do.
Thank you very much.